My wife kicked me out because she thought I was broke. She was speechless when 10 black SUVs showed up for me. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Before we begin today's incredible story, we have one small favor to ask. If you enjoy heartfelt stories filled with powerful emotions, unforgettable twists, and meaningful life lessons, please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you will never miss a new video. It only takes a second, it is completely free, and your support helps us continue creating touching and unforgettable stories for viewers around the world. We sincerely appreciate every subscription, every comment, and every moment you spend with us. We would also love to know where you are watching from. Share your city or country in the comments below because we truly enjoy seeing our community grow across different states and countries. Thank you once again for being here. Now, let us return to our main character and begin today's story. I used to believe that the worst sound a man could hear was the door closing behind him. I was wrong. The worst sound was hearing the woman he loved lock that door while he was still standing on the porch. Marcus Bennett stood quietly beneath the fading glow of the porch light as the final click of the deadbolt echoed through the cool evening air. A worn duffel bag rested at his feet. 2 cardboard boxes filled with neatly folded clothes, a pair of work boots, and several framed photographs had been left on the front steps, as though they belonged to someone who had never been part of the home at all. The silence lasted only a few seconds before Danielle Bennett folded her arms across her chest and looked at him through the open screen door with eyes that had once been full of admiration. "I cannot keep pretending anymore," she said without raising her voice. "Love does not pay the mortgage. Love does not build a future. I am tired of waiting for you to become somebody." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He could have reminded her of the nights he had worked until sunrise. He could have listed every sacrifice he had quietly made for their marriage. Instead, he simply nodded. "Once. I hope you find what you are looking for," he answered. Danielle gave a bitter laugh. "I already know what I am looking for. It just is not here." She stepped back inside, closed the screen door, and turned the lock. The porch light remained on, but it no longer felt welcoming. Across the quiet suburban street, curtains shifted. A retired couple paused their evening television, showed a watch from the living room window. A teenager walking his dog slowed down, pretending to check his phone while stealing curious glances toward the front yard. An elderly woman watering flowers across the street lowered her garden hose, her expression filled with sympathy that Marcus never wanted anyone to feel for him. He bent down, picked up the first box, balanced the duffel bag over his shoulder, and walked toward the sidewalk without looking back. Every step felt strangely lighter than the one before, as though the weight leaving his heart had finally become heavier than the boxes in his hands. He reached the corner of the block and stopped beneath a maple tree where the evening breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. He glanced at the small apartment key still hanging from his keychain. It was the only place he could afford after months of stretching every paycheck to keep their household afloat. He slipped the key into his pocket and continued walking into the gathering darkness. Behind him, Danielle watched through the living room blinds. She told herself she had made the practical choice. She convinced herself that leaving behind a struggling husband was not cruel, but necessary. She never noticed the faint vibration of the ground beneath her feet. Far beyond the entrance to the neighborhood, 10 identical black sport utility vehicles rolled silently onto the boulevard in perfect formation. Their polished exteriors reflected the fading sunset as they passed one intersection after another with quiet purpose. No flashing lights, no sirens, no unnecessary attention. They moved with the confidence of people who knew exactly where they were going. Neither Marcus nor anyone watching from the neighborhood had the slightest idea that those vehicles were searching for one man, and that before another sunrise, everything they believed about his life was about to change. Marcus Bennett reached the small apartment just after 9 o'clock that evening. The building stood beside an aging laundromat and a 24-hour convenience store where the bright fluorescent lights never seemed to dim. He unlocked the door, carried his 2 boxes inside, and quietly placed them on the worn wooden floor. The apartment measured barely 600 square feet, with a tiny kitchen, a narrow living room, and a single bedroom that echoed with emptiness. Yet after the silence he had left behind, the modest space somehow felt honest. He sat on the edge of the old sofa without turning on the television. His phone remained perfectly still. No calls, no messages, Not even a single question asking whether he had found somewhere to sleep. He rested his elbows on his knees and slowly rubbed the wedding band that still circled his finger. It had become loose after months of skipped meals and endless overtime shifts. Closing his eyes, he found himself remembering the promises he had made years earlier when he believed hard work alone could protect a marriage. He remembered taking a second warehouse job every weekend after Danielle lost her position during a difficult year. He never complained about the 16-hour days because he believed temporary exhaustion was a small price to pay for the future they dreamed about together. When her father suffered a serious health emergency that insurance did not fully cover, Marcus quietly emptied the savings account he had built since college without telling anyone except the hospital billing office. Danielle thanked him once, but within a few months the sacrifice had become another forgotten chapter. He remembered selling the restored classic motorcycle he had spent years rebuilding with his late mother's tools because the money covered 6 more mortgage payments when Danielle's business struggled. She had cried with gratitude that night and promised they would buy another one someday. That someday never arrived. Marcus smiled sadly as another memory surfaced. Danielle had once laughed every time he burned pancakes on Saturday mornings. She used to tell her friends that she had married the kindest man she had ever known. Somewhere between unpaid bills, endless comparisons with more successful husbands, and the pressure of social expectations, those warm smiles slowly disappeared. They were replaced by impatient sighs, sharp remarks, and long evenings where silence filled every room. Marcus never noticed the exact day love became disappointment because the change happened one ordinary conversation at a time. While those memories quietly settled over him, 10 black sport utility vehicles continued moving through the city with disciplined precision. They stopped briefly at a downtown office building where several professionally dressed men and women gathered around digital maps displaying residential neighborhoods. One gray-haired gentleman adjusted his glasses before pointing toward a highlighted address. "We are close," he said calmly. "Do not attract unnecessary attention. We simply need to find Mr. Marcus Bennett before anyone else does." The convoy pulled away once again, disappearing into the evening traffic with remarkable order. Back inside the apartment, Marcus unpacked only the essentials. He placed his mother's framed photograph on the small bookshelf beside the window. Her gentle smile seemed unchanged despite the passing years. "I am still trying," he whispered softly. "I hope I did not disappoint you." A faint vibration interrupted the quiet moment. His phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. Marcus stared at the screen for several seconds before the ringing stopped. He assumed it was another telemarketer and placed the phone face down on the table. Outside, less than 3 miles away, the line of black sport utility vehicles turned onto the next boulevard, each one drawing closer to the man who still believed he had lost everything. Marcus Bennett slept for barely 3 hours before the first rays of sunlight slipped through the narrow apartment window. The unfamiliar room still smelled of fresh paint and cardboard boxes, reminding him that everything familiar had disappeared in a single evening. He dressed in the same blue work shirt he had carefully ironed the night before, brewed a cup of inexpensive coffee, and stood quietly beside the window watching commuters hurry toward another ordinary Tuesday. For everyone else, it was another workday. For Marcus, it felt like the first page of a life he had never planned to write. His phone vibrated again on the kitchen counter. The same unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. He stared at it for several seconds before answering. "This is Marcus Bennett." A calm, professional voice immediately responded. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett. My name is Thomas Green. I apologize for calling again, but it is extremely important that I speak with you in person." Marcus frowned slightly. "I believe you have the wrong person." "No, sir. I am absolutely certain that I do not." Marcus leaned against the counter. "What is this regarding?" There was a brief pause before Thomas answered carefully. "I represent a private client who has spent many years trying to locate you. I have documents that can only be discussed face to face." Marcus almost laughed. He had spent years worrying about overdue bills, overtime schedules, and keeping his marriage together. The idea that someone had been searching for him sounded almost unbelievable. "If this is about money that I owe, I can promise you I already know about it," Thomas answered with surprising confidence. "Mr. Bennett, I assure you this conversation is not about money you owe. It is about something that belongs to you." Marcus remained silent. Through the apartment window, he noticed traffic flowing steadily along the street below, completely unaware that his ordinary morning had begun to shift in a direction he could not yet understand. "How did you find me?" he finally asked. "It took much longer than anyone expected," Thomas admitted. "Several addresses, employment records, and many years of patient investigation. Unfortunately, every time we came close, you had already moved. Last night we confirmed your current location." Marcus slowly lowered his coffee mug. "Who exactly is your client?" Thomas hesitated once more. "That is a conversation I would rather have in person. Confidentiality requires it." Marcus considered, ending the call. Life had taught him that unbelievable promises usually led to disappointment. Yet there was something about Thomas's steady voice that did not sound rehearsed or manipulative. It sounded respectful. "Where do you want to meet?" Marcus asked. Relief could almost be heard in the attorney's voice. "There is a private conference room reserved at Harrison and Cole Legal Services downtown. 10 o'clock this morning would be ideal if your schedule allows." Marcus glanced at the old wristwatch his mother had given him years earlier. He had planned to report for another warehouse shift in less than an hour, but something deep inside urged him not to ignore this opportunity. "I can be there. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I believe today will answer questions you never knew you should ask." The call ended. Marcus slipped the phone into his pocket, still uncertain whether he had just accepted an important meeting or walked into an elaborate misunderstanding. Several miles away, the convoy of 10 black sport utility vehicles rolled into the underground parking garage beneath Harrison and Cole Legal Services. The drivers stepped out in coordinated silence while one distinguished older gentleman adjusted his suit jacket and looked toward the private elevator. "Prepare the conference room," he said calmly. "If Mr. Marcus Bennett walks through those doors today, everything changes." Marcus Bennett arrived at Harrison and Cole Legal Services 10 minutes early, wearing the same neatly pressed blue work shirt that had accompanied him through countless warehouse shifts. The downtown office tower rose above the surrounding buildings with polished glass reflecting the bright morning sun. Yet Marcus still felt more comfortable carrying heavy boxes than walking across an elegant marble lobby. The receptionist greeted him with unexpected warmth before quietly escorting him to a private conference room on the top floor. As the elevator doors opened, Marcus noticed several men in dark suits standing respectfully near the hallway. None of them appeared threatening. Instead, they watched him with quiet curiosity, as though they had waited a very long time for this ordinary-looking man to arrive. Thomas Green stood when Marcus entered the conference room and extended his hand with genuine respect. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Bennett." Marcus accepted the handshake before taking a seat across the polished walnut table. The room overlooked nearly the entire city skyline, but his attention settled on a single leather portfolio resting in the center of the table. It had been carefully positioned as though it contained something far more valuable than paperwork. Thomas remained silent for several moments before sliding the portfolio toward Marcus. "Everything inside belongs to your family," he said calmly. Marcus looked confused. "You keep saying family, but I do not have anyone except my mother, and she passed away years ago." Thomas lowered his eyes for a brief moment. "Your mother, Olivia Bennett, never told you everything because she believed she was protecting you." Marcus felt his heartbeat slow. His mother had always avoided conversations about her childhood. Whenever he asked about grandparents or relatives, she simply smiled and changed the subject. He had assumed there was nothing left to discover. Thomas carefully opened the portfolio. Inside rested several old photographs, official birth records, handwritten letters, and a faded family portrait. Marcus immediately recognized his mother's face as a young woman standing beside an older gentleman whose expression carried unmistakable authority. "Who is he?" Marcus asked almost in a whisper. Thomas answered without hesitation. "His name is Richard Bennett. He is your grandfather." Marcus stared at the photograph, searching for something familiar in the older man's features. The resemblance around the eyes became impossible to ignore. "That cannot be true," Marcus murmured. "If he is my grandfather, where has he been my entire life?" Thomas took a slow breath before answering. "Your mother left home more than 30 years ago after a painful disagreement with her father. Pride and misunderstanding kept them apart for decades. Richard Bennett spent years trying to locate her after realizing the mistakes he had made, but by the time he finally discovered where she had lived, she had already passed away. That search did not end there. It continued until it finally led us to you. Marcus leaned back in complete silence. Every memory of his mother's quiet strength suddenly felt different. Her reluctance to speak about the past no longer seemed mysterious. It sounded heartbreaking. Thomas gently placed another item before him, a sealed envelope with elegant handwriting across the front. The ink had faded slightly with time, but one sentence remained perfectly clear. It simply read, "For my grandson, if this letter ever reaches him." Marcus looked at the envelope without touching it. He had arrived expecting another ordinary disappointment. Instead, he found himself sitting one handwritten letter away from discovering that the life he believed he understood had never been the complete story. Marcus Bennett held the envelope with both hands, as though even the slightest movement might cause the fragile paper to fall apart. The handwriting on the front looked careful rather than elegant, written by someone who understood that words carried more weight when there might never be another chance to speak them. Thomas Green remained silent, allowing Marcus to break the seal in his own time. The room seemed to grow quieter with every passing second until the only sound came from the soft rustle of unfolding paper. Marcus began reading. "My dear grandson, if these words have reached you, it means life has granted me one final gift that I feared I would never receive. Before you know anything about my success, you deserve to know about my failures. I failed your mother when she needed her father most. Pride convinced me that time would always be on my side. It was the greatest mistake of my life." Marcus paused, swallowing the growing weight in his throat before continuing. "I searched for Olivia for many years, but every answer arrived one day too late. When I learned that she had a son, I made a promise that I would not stop searching again. If you are reading this today, then that promise has finally been fulfilled. Whether you choose to know me or walk away forever will always be your decision. You owe me nothing. I only ask for the opportunity to apologize in person." Marcus slowly lowered the letter and stared through the conference room window at the busy streets below. Thousands of strangers crossed sidewalks without realizing that a single letter had just changed the course of one man's life. Thomas quietly placed a glass of water beside him. "Mr. Bennett, Richard insisted on writing that letter himself. He revised it many times over the last 3 years because he wanted every sentence to be honest." Marcus looked back at the attorney. "Is he alive?" Thomas nodded. "Yes, he is 83 years old. His health has become more fragile, but his mind remains remarkably sharp. He has refused to appoint a permanent successor because he believed finding you was more important than naming anyone else." Marcus blinked in disbelief. "Successor." Thomas carefully opened another folder. Inside were organizational charts, financial reports, and photographs of corporate headquarters that stretched across several states. Richard Bennett founded Bennett Global Industries nearly 5 decades ago. Today, the company employs tens of thousands of people across the United States. He does not want you to inherit a fortune without understanding the responsibility that comes with it. He wants to meet his grandson first. Marcus looked at the documents, but barely noticed the numbers printed across each page. Wealth was not what captured his attention. It was the realization that his mother had carried the burden of separation for her entire adult life, without allowing bitterness to define the son she raised. She had taught him kindness instead of resentment. She had chosen dignity over revenge. Marcus folded the letter with extraordinary care and slipped it back into its envelope. "I cannot promise what happens after we meet," he said quietly, "but I will not deny an old man the chance to apologize, especially when my mother is no longer here to hear those words herself." Thomas smiled for the first time that morning, not as an attorney completing a difficult assignment, but as someone witnessing hope finally arrive after years of waiting. He reached for his phone, sent a brief message, and less than a minute later, the elevator doors outside the conference room opened. The men in dark suits respectfully stepped aside as an elderly gentleman with silver hair and a polished wooden cane slowly walked toward the doorway, his eyes already filled with emotion before he even saw the face of the grandson he had searched for almost his entire life. Richard Bennett stopped just inside the doorway, leaning lightly on his polished cane as though it was supporting far more than the weight of an 83-year-old man. For several long seconds, neither he nor Marcus spoke. The silence between them did not feel awkward. It carried the weight of 3 decades of missed birthdays, unanswered questions, and family moments that could never be recovered. Richard's eyes slowly filled with tears before he finally managed a gentle smile. "You have your mother's eyes," he said quietly. Marcus stood from his chair, unsure whether to offer a handshake or simply remain where he was. Richard made the decision for him. He stepped forward, extended his trembling hand, and waited. Marcus accepted it without hesitation. The old man's grip was surprisingly firm. "I do not expect forgiveness," Richard continued. "I only wanted the chance to tell you that I am sorry." Marcus looked at the man standing before him. He had imagined many different versions of the grandfather he never knew, but none of them resembled this humble gentleman whose greatest concern seemed to be whether his grandson would allow him to finish a single sentence. "My mother taught me that people should be judged by what they choose to do today, not only by what they regret from yesterday," Marcus replied. "So I am here." Richard lowered his head for a brief moment before smiling again. "Then she became a far better person than I ever deserved." Over the next several hours, they talked not about wealth, business, or inheritance, but about Olivia. Richard shared childhood photographs Marcus had never seen, stories about her love of piano music, and memories of family camping trips that ended with everyone laughing around a fire beneath the stars. Marcus realized that for the first time in his life, someone was filling in the missing pages of his mother's story. By late afternoon, Richard led Marcus through the headquarters of Bennett Global Industries. Employees greeted the elderly founder with genuine respect, yet what surprised Marcus most was how many people stopped to ask about Richard's health before discussing work. "A company is never measured only by profit," Richard explained as they overlooked the trading floor from a glass balcony. "It is measured by how people feel when they walk through its doors every morning." Marcus listened carefully. He had expected luxury. Instead, he found discipline, responsibility, and purpose. Richard handed him a visitor identification badge instead of a title. "If you decide to be part of this company, you will begin where every executive should begin. You will learn every department, meet every team, and earn every person's respect. Your last name will open the front door, but your character must keep it open." Marcus nodded without hesitation. "That is exactly how I would want it." Richard smiled with unmistakable pride. "Then perhaps I have found not only my grandson, but also the future this company has been waiting for." Meanwhile, across town, Danielle Bennett sat inside her attorney's office reviewing divorce paperwork. She signed each page with steady confidence, convinced she was closing the chapter of a marriage that had nowhere left to go. Her older sister Cheryl Lawson glanced at the documents and smiled. "You did the right thing. You cannot build a future with someone who has nothing." Danielle quietly agreed, unaware that only a few miles away, the man she had dismissed as a failure was spending his first day learning the values of one of the largest privately owned companies in the country. Before Marcus prepared to leave headquarters that evening, Richard handed him a simple cream-colored envelope embossed with the company seal. "There will be a charity gala in 2 weeks," he said warmly. "I would be honored if you stood beside me that night. Not because of what the world should know about you, but because it is finally time for our family to stand together again." 2 weeks passed with a steady rhythm that Marcus Bennett had never experienced before. Every morning began before sunrise, not because anyone demanded it, but because he refused to arrive after the people who had been building Bennett Global Industries long before he entered its doors. Instead of sitting in executive offices, he spent his days walking factory floors, visiting distribution centers, observing customer service teams, and asking questions that revealed genuine curiosity instead of entitlement. Richard Bennett watched from a distance more often than he spoke, quietly smiling each time another employee mentioned that the founder's grandson thanked janitors, remembered first names, and stayed after meetings to help move chairs without anyone asking. Marcus did not feel like an heir. He felt like a student finally discovering how much he still had to learn. One afternoon, Richard invited him into his private office overlooking the city skyline. The old man poured 2 cups of coffee before placing a thin folder on the desk. "You have earned the respect of people who had every reason to doubt you," Richard said warmly. "That matters far more than impressing shareholders." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "My mother always believed respect should arrive before success." Richard smiled. "That is exactly why she should have been here to see this." For a brief moment, neither man spoke. They simply shared the quiet understanding that some absences could never be replaced. Across town, Danielle Bennett walked out of the county courthouse holding a stamped copy of the divorce filing. The legal process had officially begun. Cheryl Lawson wrapped an arm around her younger sister's shoulder with obvious satisfaction. "Now you can finally move forward," Cheryl said confidently. "You deserve someone who can actually give you the life you want." Danielle forced a small smile. "I hope you are right." Although she sounded certain, something inside her felt strangely unsettled. She had expected freedom to feel lighter. Instead, every quiet evening seemed to echo with memories she kept trying to ignore. A few days later, an elegant cream-colored envelope arrived at Danielle's office. Embossed across the front were the words Bennett Global Foundation Annual Legacy Gala. Her company had recently been selected as one of several finalists competing for a long-term corporate partnership with Bennett Global Industries, making the invitation impossible to ignore. Cheryl immediately became excited. "Do you realize what this means? Every major executive in the state will be there. People spend years trying to get into that ballroom." Danielle carefully unfolded the invitation. One sentence immediately caught her attention. Guests would witness a special announcement regarding the future leadership of Bennett Global Industries. News of the mysterious announcement spread quickly throughout the local business community. Financial analysts speculated that Richard Bennett was finally preparing to introduce the successor who would someday inherit one of the country's most respected private companies. No one seemed to know the person's identity. Newspapers described the future heir as a complete mystery. Television commentators debated whether it might be an experienced executive, a distant family member, or an unexpected outside leader. Meanwhile, Marcus remained completely unaware of the growing public speculation. He spent that same afternoon helping warehouse supervisors review shipping procedures before joining Richard for a simple dinner at the old man's home. As the evening came to an end, Richard handed Marcus a tailored black tuxedo that had been prepared specifically for the upcoming gala. "Wear this because you are my grandson," Richard said softly. "Not because of the wealth attached to our family name. Never allow a suit to convince you that you are more valuable than the man who wore work boots only a few weeks ago." Marcus smiled with quiet gratitude and accepted the garment. Neither of them realized that before the gala even began, fate had arranged one final encounter that would leave an entire neighborhood standing speechless. The morning of the gala arrived beneath a cloudless blue sky, but Marcus Bennett treated it like every other workday. He arrived at headquarters before most employees, reviewed inventory reports with a logistics manager, and spent nearly an hour speaking with a maintenance technician whose retirement was only weeks away. Richard Bennett watched the conversation from the second floor without interrupting. When Marcus finally returned to his office, Richard smiled quietly. "You continue to surprise people," he said. Marcus shrugged gently. "Every person here helped build something that existed long before I arrived. They deserve my respect." Richard nodded with unmistakable pride. "That answer tells me more than any financial report ever could." By late afternoon, Marcus returned to his apartment to prepare for the evening. The modest building looked exactly as it had the day Danielle asked him to leave. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalk. A mail carrier finished the last deliveries on the block. Nothing appeared unusual until a distant hum echoed through the quiet neighborhood. One neighbor looked toward the main road. Another stepped onto a front porch. Within seconds, 10 identical black sport utility vehicles turned slowly onto the residential street, their polished black paint reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. They moved in perfect formation, one behind another, with remarkable precision. Every conversation on the block came to an immediate stop. Curtains shifted behind windows. People stepped outside holding cups of coffee, grocery bags, and garden tools, all wondering which celebrity or government official could possibly be visiting their neighborhood. The convoy slowed before reaching Marcus's apartment building. Then, one by one, every vehicle came to a smooth stop directly in front of the entrance. Uniformed drivers stepped out together, each dressed in tailored black suits with white gloves. One driver walked respectfully to the rear passenger door of the center vehicle and opened it. Thomas Green emerged first before turning toward the building entrance. Moments later, Richard Bennett stepped onto the sidewalk with measured confidence, supported by his polished wooden cane. The entire street fell silent. Marcus had just locked his apartment door when he noticed the unexpected gathering below. He paused for a brief moment, surprised to see Richard standing beside the vehicles instead of waiting at the hotel. Richard looked up, smiled warmly, and raised one hand in greeting. "I thought my grandson should not arrive alone tonight," he called. Marcus walked downstairs, dressed in the tailored black tuxedo Richard had given him only days earlier. The simple confidence in his posture bore little resemblance to the exhausted man who had carried cardboard boxes into the apartment weeks before, yet the kindness in his eyes remained exactly the same. Richard straightened Marcus's lapel with the quiet affection of a grandfather making up for lost years. "You look exactly as your mother would have hoped," he said softly. Marcus smiled. "Thank you for coming yourself." "Some moments deserve more than a driver," Richard replied. Across the street, Danielle had stopped by Cheryl's house to pick her up before leaving for the gala together. As they backed out of the driveway, both women froze. Cheryl lowered her sunglasses in complete disbelief, while Danielle gripped the steering wheel without saying a word. They watched Marcus exchange a respectful embrace with the distinguished elderly gentleman before Thomas opened the rear passenger door. Richard gestured for Marcus to enter first. Marcus politely shook his head until Richard climbed inside ahead of him. Only then did Marcus take the seat beside his grandfather. The doors closed gently, and the convoy pulled away with quiet elegance. Danielle remained motionless long after the last black vehicle disappeared around the corner. Unable to explain why the man she believed had nothing had just been escorted away by 10 black sport utility vehicles under the watchful respect of people who clearly treated him like someone whose arrival truly mattered. The Grand Regency ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers as hundreds of guests filled the elegant hall, their conversations blending into a low murmur of anticipation. Leaders from major corporations, charitable organizations, and community foundations gathered beneath banners celebrating another year of service through Bennett Global Foundation. Danielle Bennett and Cheryl Lawson stepped through the entrance dressed in formal evening gowns, carefully scanning the room for executives they hoped to impress. Everywhere they turned, people whispered about the same mystery. No one seemed to know who Richard Bennett had chosen to lead the company into the future. Some predicted a celebrated chief executive from another state. Others believed an accomplished member of the board would receive the honor. Danielle quietly listened, never imagining that the answer had once shared breakfast with her every morning. Moments later, the ballroom lights softened as the master of ceremonies welcomed everyone to the stage. Applause echoed through the room, while Richard Bennett slowly walked toward the podium with his familiar wooden cane. Despite his age, his voice remained calm and confident. "For many years," he began, "people have asked me the same question. Who will one day carry the responsibility of Bennett Global Industries? Tonight, I finally have the privilege of answering that question." The ballroom became perfectly silent. Richard paused, allowing the moment to settle before looking toward the grand entrance. "Before I introduce the future of our company, I would like you to meet someone who reminded me that character is never inherited. It is earned." Every eye turned toward the open doors. Marcus Bennett stepped into the ballroom wearing the same quiet humility he had carried into the warehouse every morning. His tailored black tuxedo reflected elegance, but nothing about his expression suggested pride or superiority. He walked steadily toward the stage while executives, board members, and longtime employees greeted him with warm smiles and respectful nods. Danielle felt her heartbeat quicken with every step Marcus took. Cheryl stared in complete disbelief, unable to understand why the distinguished guests seemed to recognize the man they had dismissed only weeks earlier. Richard extended his hand as Marcus joined him beneath the lights. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard said, his voice filled with unmistakable emotion, "this remarkable young man is my grandson, Marcus Bennett. He is also the person I have chosen to prepare as the future steward of Bennett Global Industries." A wave of astonishment swept across the ballroom before giving way to sustained applause. Danielle stood frozen as every conversation from the past several weeks suddenly made sense. The mysterious air, the black sport utility vehicles, the respect shown by executives, the quiet confidence Marcus had displayed even after she asked him to leave. None of it had been an accident. Richard gently placed one hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Many people measure success by wealth," he continued. "I measure it by integrity. My grandson had every opportunity to become bitter because of life's disappointments, yet he chose kindness. He was tested before he was trusted, and he passed every test without realizing anyone was watching." Richard stepped back from the microphone and invited Marcus forward. Marcus looked across the room before speaking with the same calm voice that had carried him through every difficult chapter of his life. "Thank you for your generosity tonight," he began. "The greatest lesson I have learned is that a person's value cannot be measured by the size of a bank account, the title on an office door, or the opinion of those who only notice success after it becomes visible. The people who treated me with dignity before they knew my story gave me something far more valuable than opportunity. They gave me hope. I intend to spend the rest of my life building a company where character always matters more than status." The audience rose to its feet once again. After the ceremony ended, Danielle slowly approached Marcus with tears gathering in her eyes. "I was wrong," she whispered. "I judged you by what I thought you lacked instead of appreciating everything you quietly gave." Marcus offered a gentle smile that carried neither anger nor triumph. "I truly hope you find the future you were searching for," he replied. "But I also hope one day you discover that the richest people are not always the ones with the most money. They are the ones who never lose themselves while chasing it." With those words, Marcus respectfully shook Richard's hand, walked beside his grandfather toward the waiting entrance, and disappeared into the quiet night, leaving behind not a story of revenge, but a lasting reminder that dignity shines brightest when it never needs to announce itself.